Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. I never planned on becoming someone's secret. When I met Daniel, I only knew him as the charming executive who came into the cafe where I worked every morning. He had this magnetic presence, the kind that made you look twice even when you told yourself you shouldn't. He was older, confident, and every word he spoke carried the kind of attention most women craved out at first. It was harmless. He'd order his black coffee, flash that devastating smile, and ask me about my day. But then came the longer conversations, the way he lingered even when his driver was waiting outside. He made me feel seen, truly seen, in a way no one ever had before. It wasn't long before we crossed the line. What started as subtle glances and fleeting touches turned into nights filled with whispered confessions and stolen kisses. He told me things he had never told anyone, that his marriage had been hollow for years, that he felt invisible at home, that with me he felt alive again. And I believed him. Every moment we shared felt dangerous and intoxicating, like we were standing on the edge of a cliff and neither of us cared about the fall. But secrets have a way of unraveling. One evening, as rain pounded against the city streets, Daniel and I sat tucked away in the corner of a dimly lit restaurant. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine, and for a moment I forgot the world outside even existed. That's when I noticed her, his wife, standing just a few feet away, staring at us with eyes that could burn through steel. My heart stopped. Daniel froze. In that instant, the illusion we had built came crashing down. She didn't scream, didn't cause a scene. She just walked over, placed her hand on the table between us, and whispered, "I always knew you were hiding something." The calmness in her voice was more terrifying than any rage. The fallout was messy. Daniel begged me to wait for him, swore he would fix everything, but the weight of being a secret was crushing me. I had built a love out of shadows, and now the light had found us. The thrill of our romance had turned into a nightmare of suspicion, guilt, and heartbreak. Looking back, I realized I wasn't just his secret. I was also hiding from myself. Because love built on lies, no matter how passionate, always comes with a price. When Daniel's wife caught us that night, everything I thought I knew about him, about us, began to crumble. He stayed frozen in his chair, staring at her as though he'd been caught in a storm he couldn't escape. My chest tightened, not only from guilt, but from the terrifying realization that I was no longer hidden. I wasn't just his secret anymore. I was the woman standing in the ruins of someone else's life. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply looked at me, then at him, and shook her head slowly before turning away. The sound of her heels clicking against the tile as she left was deafening. Daniel chased after her, leaving me sitting there, staring at the table, my hands trembling. The waiter came to ask if everything was all right, but my throat was too tight to answer. That night, Daniel didn't call. For the first time since this all began, I slept with my phone face up beside me, and silence pressing down on me like a weight. Days passed before he reached out, and when he finally did, his voice was cracked and exhausted. He told me his wife had left the house, that she knew everything now, and that his entire world was falling apart. He asked me to meet him, and though my instincts screamed that I shouldn't, I couldn't stop myself. When I saw him again, he looked different. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his hair messy, like he hadn't slept in days. He reached for me the moment I walked in, his hands gripping mine so tightly it almost hurt. He kept saying, "I'll fix this. I'll make it right. Just don't leave me." I wanted to believe him, wanted to let his words soothe the fire of guilt burning in me, but there was a part of me that wondered if he wanted me out of love, or simply because he couldn't stand to be alone. Weeks dragged on in limbo. He and his wife weren't speaking, but she hadn't filed for divorce either. I became the ghost in his life, someone he saw in hotel rooms and empty apartments while pretending everything else was under control. But nothing was under control his. Wife began showing up at places we've been, not with rage, but with a quiet, unnerving calm. Once, she even caught me in the parking lot outside his office. She walked right up to me, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You think you're special? You're just a chapter in his long list of mistakes." Her words pierced deeper than anything Daniel had ever confessed. For days, I replayed them in my head, wondering if she was right. Maybe I wasn't the love of his life. Maybe I was just the escape route he needed until he was ready to face himself. That realization shook me more than the fear of being caught. Ever did, still the pull between us was magnetic. Every time I told myself it was over, he'd show up with those tired eyes, with a kiss that felt desperate, with promises I wanted so badly to be true. He made me feel desired in ways I'd never known, and the passion between us was fire intense, consuming, dangerous. But passion without peace is a prison, and slowly, I began to realize I was locked inside. The night everything came to a breaking point, he showed up at my apartment unannounced. His wife had served him with divorce papers. He was shaking as he poured everything out, the betrayal she felt, the rage in her silence, the way his children refused to look at him. He begged me to stay with him, to be the one thing that hadn't abandoned him. I held him, but my heart felt heavy. Because in that moment, I finally saw what I had refused to see before. I was not his future. I had been the escape, the distraction, the secret that had destroyed his life. The fire between us burned hot, but fires only consume. They don't build. As dawn crept in through the window, I kissed his forehead, whispered that I loved him, and told him it had to end. He broke down, gripping me like he could stop me from leaving. But I knew that if I stayed, I'd lose myself completely. Walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done. For weeks, my chest ached with the emptiness of him not being there. I'd hear his voice in every quiet moment, feel his touch in every silence. But slowly, the weight lifted. Slowly, I learned that I deserved more than being someone's secret. Sometimes. I still wonder if he thinks of me, if he regrets the way everything fell apart. But then I remind myself that what we had wasn't love, it was desire wrapped in lies. Passion tangled in deception. And no matter how intoxicating it felt, it was never going to last. I was a secret until his wife found out. But in the end, it was me who found out the truth about him, about us, and about myself. After I walked away from Daniel that morning, I told myself it was over, that I had finally found the strength to put an end to something that was slowly tearing me apart. But endings aren't as clean as we want them to be. They linger. They haunt. And sometimes they come back knocking when you least expect it. 2 months passed before I saw him again. I just finished a late shift at the cafe and was walking to my car when I heard his voice call my name. My stomach twisted the moment. I turned and saw him standing there, leaning against his car like nothing had changed, though everything had. He looked thinner, more worn down, but his eyes were the same, hungry, desperate, searching for me like I was the only thing left holding him together. I froze, torn between wanting to run and wanting to fall into his arms again. He walked up to me slowly, almost cautiously, as though he knew he had no right to be there. He told me the divorce was final, that his wife had taken the house, that he was renting a small apartment downtown. He laughed bitterly, saying, "I thought losing her would be the hardest part, but it was losing you." I should have walked away. I should have let him vanish into the night. But there was something in his voice, something raw and broken, that made me stay. I told myself it was just one coffee, just one conversation, just closure. We sat in his car for hours, the city lights casting shadows over us, and it felt almost like the beginning again, when it was just glances and laughter, and that dangerous spark we couldn't resist. One coffee turned into dinners into nights, and before I realized it, I was back where I had sworn I'd never be. Only this time, there was no wife in the background, no secret to keep. It was just him and me. And yet, something was different. Without the danger of being caught, the fire between us seemed less like passion and more like a storm that refused. To settle, he was restless, angry, bitter at the world for what he had lost. And I often wondered if he truly wanted me or if he just needed someone to fill the silence his wife had left behind. Still, I stayed. I stayed because I wanted to believe that love could grow out of the ruins of what we'd done. I wanted to believe that the story we started in shadows could survive in the light. But reality doesn't bend to hope. His temper started to show in small cracks, snapping at waiters, slamming doors when he couldn't find his keys, drinking a little too much to numb the loneliness that trailed him everywhere. One night, after a long argument about nothing and everything all at once, I found myself standing by the window of his apartment, staring at the city below. He came up behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his voice soft as he whispered, "Don't leave me, you're all I have." And that's when it hit me. He wasn't asking me to stay out of love. He was asking out of fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of facing himself. I tried to help him. I encouraged him to see someone, to talk through the pain instead of drowning it. Sometimes he listened. Sometimes he didn't. But the more I tried to carry his weight, the heavier my own became. I started losing pieces of myself. My friends drifted away. My family stopped asking about him. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had traded her peace for a man who couldn't find his own. The final breaking point came on a cold winter night. We had gone out for dinner, and he had a little too much to drink. On the way home, he started ranting about his ex-wife, about how she had ruined everything, how she had poisoned the kids against him. I sat in silence, my hands clenched in my lap, until he finally turned to me and said, "You don't understand. You never will. You weren't enough to make me leave her back then, and you'll never be enough to replace her now." The words sliced through me like a blade. All the nights I'd stayed, all the tears I'd shed, all the hope I'd carried, all crumbled in that single moment. I didn't say a word. When we got back to his apartment, I grabbed my coat and walked out. He didn't chase me this time. Maybe he knew he had finally pushed me too far. It's been months since that night. He's tried to call, left messages I've never listened to. Showed up at the cafe only for me to walk past him like he was a stranger. Sometimes I still think about him, about the way he once made me feel alive, about the fire that consumed us both. But then I remember the ashes it left behind. I was a secret once, hidden away in the shadows of lies and desire. Then I was his refuge. The place he ran to and the life he built fell apart. But I was never his choice. Not really. And the hardest lesson I've learned is that being someone's secret or someone's escape is never the same as being their love. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I breathe easier. The weight is gone. The silence in my life no longer feels empty. It feels peaceful. And though a part of me will always remember the way he looked at me across that cafe counter, I know I made the right choice. Because sometimes love isn't about holding on, it's about finding the strength to let go. I thought walking away from Daniel would be the final chapter, but life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. Years passed and I built a life that felt stable again. I moved to another city, took a better job, made new friends, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for myself rather than surviving for someone else. The memory of Daniel faded, though never completely. He was like a scar, faded over time, but still there if you looked closely. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, he appeared again. I was standing in line at a bookstore cafe, waiting for my latte, when I heard my name spoken softly, almost like a question. I turned, and there he was, older, leaner, his hair streaked with more gray than I remembered. His eyes carried the same intensity, but this time there was a heaviness, a quiet surrender in them. For a moment, it felt like the years had dissolved. And we were back in that cafe where it all began. He asked if he could sit with me, and against my better judgment, I agreed. We talked for hours. He told me about the divorce, how his children barely spoke to him, how his career had taken hits he never imagined. He admitted to being bitter, angry, and lost after I left, but said that losing me had finally forced him to face himself. He had gone to therapy, cut back on drinking, and was slowly trying to rebuild. Listening to him stirred emotions I thought I had buried. A part of me wanted to believe him, to see the man I once loved instead of the broken one I had walked away from. He asked if we could meet again, not to start over, but just to catch up. I agreed, though deep down I knew I was playing with fire. The more we met, the more old feelings resurfaced. But this time, there was no rush of stolen kisses or reckless passion. There was a quiet intimacy, a gentleness between us that hadn't existed before. He would ask about my life, genuinely listening in a way he hadn't when we were together. Sometimes he'd share regrets, telling me how much he hated the man he used to be, how often he thought about the night he told me I'd never be enough. I could see the shame in his eyes, and though the wounds still ached, part of me wanted to forgive. One evening after dinner, he walked me to my car. We stood there for a long time, the silence heavy with everything unspoken. He finally reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his hand lingering on my cheek. His voice was low when he said, "I don't deserve a second chance with you, but if I had one, I'd spend the rest of my life proving I've changed." My heart trembled at his words. I had spent so long convincing myself that what we had was only destruction, that he was nothing more than a mistake. And yet, standing there in the cool night air, I realized that people aren't always the same versions of themselves we once knew. They change. They fall, they break, they rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, they learn how to love differently. I didn't answer him that night. I drove home with my mind racing, torn between fear and hope. Part of me still carried the pain of being a secret, the shame of being the reason a marriage collapsed. But another part of me couldn't ignore the way my chest ached at the thought of letting him slip away again. Weeks passed, and we continued to see each other. Slowly, we built something new, fragile and cautious, but real. He wasn't the man who once hid me in the shadows. He wasn't the desperate figure begging me not to leave. He was someone learning to stand on his own feet, someone who had faced the wreckage of his choices and come out the other side humbled. Still, I struggled. Every time we grew closer, the echo of his wife's voice came back to me, her calm. Cutting words in that restaurant years ago, "You think you're special?" Or just a chapter in his long list of mistakes. I wondered if she was still right, if I was only reopening an old wound. One night, while we were sitting in his apartment, I finally asked him the question that had haunted me all these years. "Why me, Daniel? Why did you choose me back then?" Was I just an escape? He looked at me for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes soft. Then he said, "At first, yes. You were the light I ran to when everything else felt dark. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about escape. It became about you. And that's what terrified me the most, because I knew what I stood to lose if I admitted it." His honesty cut through me. It didn't erase the past, but it gave me clarity. He had been flawed, selfish, reckless. But he wasn't hiding anymore. And for the first time, I saw him not as the man I once fell into, but as the man he was trying to become. It wasn't easy. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, and forgiveness doesn't erase scars. There were moments of doubt, of fear, of wondering if history was doomed to repeat itself. But there were also moments of tenderness, of quiet laughter, of feeling like maybe. After all the chaos, we had found something worth holding on to. I still don't know where this path will lead us. Maybe it ends in heartbreak again. Maybe it ends in something stronger than either of us imagined. All I know is that life rarely gives us neat endings. Sometimes it gives us second chances in the most unexpected places. And the choice is whether we're brave enough to take them. And so, after all these years, I find myself standing beside the man who once shattered me, not because I've forgotten the pain, but because I've seen it change. Because love isn't about the perfect story, it's about the courage to write a new one, even when the old pages are still stained. The first time I met Daniel's children, it was not planned. We had been seeing each other for nearly a year. Since our unexpected reunion, and though our bond had grown stronger, there were parts of his life I stayed away from. He had told me often that his kids were not ready to meet anyone new, that the wounds of the divorce were still raw. I never pressed him. I told myself I could be patient, but in the back of my mind, I worried that I was still kept outside of the most important parts of his world. It happened on a rainy Sunday afternoon. We had gone grocery shopping together, something so mundane yet so intimate after years of stolen moments and shadows. As we walked toward the exit, I saw two teenagers standing by the entrance. Their eyes locked on Daniel with an intensity that made me stop in my tracks. His daughter was the first to speak, her voice sharp, bitter. "So this is her?" she said, looking at me with the same fire her mother had all those years ago. Daniel's face drained of color. He stumbled over his words, trying to explain, but the damage was already done. His son shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable," before walking out into the rain. His daughter lingered, her eyes glassy with unshed tears, before she turned away and followed her brother. The silence that followed us home was unbearable. Daniel tried to reassure me, saying they would come around, that time would heal the wounds. But I could see the cracks in him, the way guilt weighed down every word. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just our story anymore. It was theirs too. Weeks turned into months, and his children wanted nothing to do with me. They ignored his calls, showed coldness when they visited, and when they did speak to him, it was often about how he had ruined their mother's life. There were nights when I would lie awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was destined to always be the fracture in his world. He would hold my hand, whispering that he loved me, but he couldn't lose me again, but even love can't erase resentment from others' hearts. One evening, after another tense phone call with his daughter, Daniel broke down in front of me. He sat on the couch, his face in his hands, his voice breaking as he admitted, "I destroyed the only family I had. And no matter what I do, they'll never forgive me." Seeing him so vulnerable tore me apart. I wanted to remind him that people change, that he was not the man he used to be, but deep inside, I feared his children might never see that. Time, however, has a strange way of shifting things. His son eventually agreed to meet me for coffee, though he made it clear he didn't. Considerate acceptance. We sat in a quiet corner of a cafe, and for most of the time, he barely looked at me. Finally, he asked, "Do you even realize what you did to my mom?" To us? I didn't try to defend myself. I told him the truth, that I had been selfish, that I had been caught up in something I didn't fully understand, that I had loved his father even when I knew it was wrong. I told him I had carried the guilt for years, and that I wasn't asking for forgiveness, only for him to see that I was trying to be someone better now. He didn't say much when he left, but weeks later, he called Daniel, and for the first time in years, their conversation didn't end in anger. His daughter, on the other hand, stayed distant. She reminded me so much of her mother, the calm exterior, the sharp eyes that seemed to cut right through me. And every time I saw her, I felt like I was back in that restaurant with her mother, standing over us, whispering that I was just a mistake. As the years stretched on, the rawness of the past began to soften. Daniel's children never fully embraced me, but they stopped looking at me like a wound. There were family dinners where we sat together, conversations that didn't feel like battles, moments where I caught glimpses of acceptance in their eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Through it all, my love for Daniel deepened, not with the reckless fire of the past, but with a steady warmth that surprised me. We learned how to argue without tearing each other apart, how to be honest without fear, how to sit in silence and feel complete. Sometimes I would catch him staring at me with that same look he gave me in the cafe years ago. And in those moments, I knew why I had chosen to give us another chance, but there were still nights when doubt crept in. When I lay awake wondering if I had stolen too much from others to deserve this happiness, when I thought of his wife, the life I had helped dismantle, and whether she ever found peace, I carried that guilt quietly, a shadow that followed me even in the brightest moments. Daniel seemed to sense it. One night, as we sat together on the balcony watching the city lights, He took my hand and said, "I know what you're thinking. I know you still blame yourself." He paused, squeezing my hand gently. "But if I've learned anything, it's that we can't keep punishing ourselves for who we used to be. We can only prove who we are now." His words stayed with me. They didn't erase the past, but they gave me permission to live in the present. And as the years continued, I realized that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who sees your flaws, your scars, your mistakes, and still chooses to stay. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if his wife hadn't walked into that restaurant, if the secret had lasted longer. Maybe we would have destroyed each other completely. Maybe we would have ended sooner. But maybe fate has a way of forcing truth into the light, even if it shatters everything first. Now, when I look at Daniel, older, softer, more at peace than I've ever seen him, I don't see the man who once pulled me into shadows. I see the man who fought his way back into the light, who learned how to love without fear, who chose me not as a secret, but as a partner. And though our story began in betrayal, it became something else, entirely a story of broken people trying to rebuild, of second chances, of learning that sometimes the most complicated love is also the one that teaches you who you really are.